Hi everyone, and welcome to another Collectomaniac video. Today we're going to be continuing to look at my 1/6 scale custom horror figure collection. We have another One's Customs figures piece here, and this is from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddys Revenge. The piece itself comes with 3 head sculpts, Freddy's hat, 2 different gloved hands, and a stand. I believe the piece is around 4 to 5 years old. However, don't quote me on that, and this was my first Freddy figure. As you can see, the base is a great style, as if to simulate the typical boiler room that Freddy would naturally find himself in. There's rust colouring, there's various different tones that have gone on, and it's a nice effect. Looking at the upper part of the boot, you can see the original colour was a light brown style. However, the tops and the front of the boot now have been weathered, polish removed, so they're more of a tan style leather. The front, there's scuffs, there's divots in the front, and they've been weathered nicely. As the piece comes round, you can see that the boots aren't just weathered from the front, they're at all angles. You can also see the different textures in the base. The trousers themselves have also been weathered. There's dye missing from the front, there's scuff marks, there's tiny little bits of thread that have been taken off. You can see a glimpse of the gloved hand there. We will focus on that, but you can also see the cuff has been frayed, as well as the underside of the jumper, which is all standard and what you would expect from a Freddy piece. The left hand, which is the ungloved one, has been sculpted nicely. The nails are there. It looks basically like it's burnt, which is exactly what it should be. It's been painted nicely. There's different tones throughout, which is exactly what you would expect from skin that has received such significant burn. As the piece spins round, we'll start to get our first real good look at the glove. Now, some of you may know, Freddy made the glove himself. So the base of the glove was an old leather work glove from the boiler room. He also included rivets, pipes, sheet metal, and fishing knives. An interesting fact that the knives in the first 2 gloves, so Nightmare on Elm Street and Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, were actually in fact shorter than the gloves that preceded it. Now you can see there's been some nice weathering on the blades there, so they're not just clean and shiny. The rivet detail is there. You could see the inside of the palm, back plates there. There's definitely colour differences, which you would expect from the different metals that has been put into the glove. Overall, I'd say this is a good interpretation of the Part 2 glove. Now, you can't discuss a Freddy Krueger piece without going over what I would class as the holy trifecta of the fedora, the glove, and of course, Freddy's iconic red and green sweater. Now, as with most sequels, there were changes from the original. From Part 2 onwards, the jumper featured red and green stripes on the sleeves instead of just around the chest area. Now, interesting fact, Wes Craven decided on the iconic colour scheme for the jumper, mainly due to the fact that red and green is apparently the most difficult colour combination for the human eye to see. And his reasoning for making the jumper striped is that way, with Freddy's shapeshifting abilities, you could always tell it was him no matter what he turned into. While going around the piece, you can see that the sweater has been nicely weathered. The cuffs have fraying to the undersides of them, they're rolled up. As well as the front and the back, there's oil marks, all of the standard things you would expect to see on a Freddy jumper. Around the waist area, there's cuts. The weathering and aging is consistent over the sweater, which I feel is important as these pieces aren't just meant to be viewed from the front, but from all angles. The last thing I'd like to reiterate here is that it may seem like the jumper has been made too big or oversized. It's simply not the case. If you watch the films, you see that the jumpers are always a little bit baggy on Freddy, especially on the cuff area as they were rolled up. Part of the iconic look for Freddy is of course the fedora. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe they used the same fedora throughout any of the films because of course films get shut down, props go missing, cast members take them, they get sold off, etc, etc. However, I believe they at least tried to be consistent, at least from Part 2 onwards, in that they would have the light, almost a sandy brown colour. There would be the infamous fedora brim. Over on the Part 2 fedora, again, it was difficult to actually make out a lot of the details because most of the scenes involving Freddy were awfully dark. Now, one's been able to capture some of the weathering on the front. There's obviously some of the infamous nicks, the holes, but the main thing which I'm always impressed whenever you get these pieces is that the hat actually accurately fits on the head as it should, because it's not just a case of you sculpt the hat, cast it, it just comes perfect on top. You've got to make sure that it first doesn't sit too low on the head, of course, but also actually doesn't sit proud or even, you know, fall off. It's got to be stable. So that's the first part which commend anyone who makes hats for characters. If I'm being honest, I prefer a mixed media hat, as it just looks that little bit more realistic. I think unfortunately with casted hats, they just have that tendency to look a little bit plasticky, and on this example you can see a few of the casting marks. However, overall, I said it's been weathered nicely and it actually sits on the head without falling off, which is a fundamental in my opinion. Now, as any Nightmare on Elm Street fan will know, the makeup in every single film was different, and the change between part 1 and part 2 was significant. First and foremost, the orange eyes from part 2, just the way the skin and the textures and the burns looked. When you think of how the makeup in the first one was designed, I remember reading a quote which the makeup designer said he was inspired by looking at a pepperoni pizza one evening during filming, and you can certainly tell that when you take it into account. Whereas the makeup for part 2 was designed by Kevin Yeager, and one has certainly captured an awful lot of detail in this sculpt. See, there are crevices around these, there's welts, there's depth to those burns, and that's also backed up by how he's painted it. There's reds, there's also glistening marks where it almost looks like these fresh burns. The way the skin molds around the ear and so forth, it's difficult to tell where the cheekbone ends and the ear begins. There's pinks here. You know, I would say the design is based off the pull scene, but again, there are many parts during the film where Freddy does pull such faces. So I'll let you make up your own minds there. The teeth have been sculpted very well. You can see they're individually made, and they've been coloured that telltale yellow with black around the edges. My only real criticism of this head sculpt would be that I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of a glistening effect to really bring out the colours of the burns. The second head sculpt is painted just as well as the first. The real differences here are in the mouth area. There's an obvious grin going here, and the brow is far more furrowed down, and he's also glancing more to the right hand side, but overall it's the same quality. The final head sculpt is based off the infamous "you've got the body, I've got the brain" scene, which for me is one of the best parts of the film, where Freddy casually rips off the skin to the side of his head, revealing that gorgeous brain underneath. Now I feel one has done an adequate representation of Freddy's brain from the film. The scene was obviously dark, so it's difficult to tell, but there were enough makeup shots in order to get an idea. My only real criticism of the head sculpt is that I would have preferred the area to be a little bit larger of where the brain is revealing. I also feel the sculpt in this head sculpt isn't quite as clean or as crisp as the first head sculpts. I'm not sure why, however, this is just my opinion. Let me know in the comments what you think. This is the beautiful knife finger hands. The blades come directly out of the fingernails, just like in the film. There's blood up and down the blades, and I think one's done a great job of representing what it looked like in the film. Now, there's something I want you to bear in mind when looking at this piece. This was made over 5 years ago, and since then the world has moved on. I mean, first and foremost, one's custom sculpting, painting, and just overall general skill set has increased tenfold. So if he were to make the same figure again, I have absolutely no doubt he would blow it out the park. Secondly, you've had companies like NECA, for instance, who have produced their own versions of this. I mean, it's never going to be to the same quality as the mixed media, etc. But again, it's something else to consider. As I'm sure some of you are aware, Vito Matali did his own version of this, and I've owned the piece, I've owned the full set. And there's no doubt it is a fantastic set, but for me it didn't speak to me, in a sense that, don't get me wrong, the sculpt was incredible, it was painted impeccably, but it didn't scare me. And when I look at my collection, I want my pieces to speak to me. I want them to remind me of a scene from the film, or just a film in general, and That's what One's Customs pieces achieve for me. I'm not going to sit here and bash one artist and say someone's better than someone else, but this is all personal preference and opinion. That's what makes this hobby fun. You know, everyone has a different view, so on. That brings us to the end of a detailed look at the One's Customs Nightmare on Elm Street 2 Freddy's Revenge figure. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like. If you have any questions or comments, then write those below. I will get back to you. And please consider subscribing. That way, when my next video goes live, you can get alerts, etc. And it will help the channel out. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.